Committee. I am joined today by lead sponsor, Councilor Edwards. I'd like to remind everyone that this is a public hearing and is being recorded and will be rebroadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and online. I ask that you please silence your cell phones and other devices. If you wish to publicly testify, please check the box, the sign-in sheet at the front. When it's your time for a public testimony, I will ask that you please state your name and affiliation or residence, and that you limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns are heard. This is a hearing for docket 0135, a hearing regarding student transportation in the Boston Public Schools. As chair of the Committee on Education, it's important to me that as a city we are making sure to eliminate all barriers for children to access education. One of those barriers for our families in this city continues to be transportation. At the beginning of this school year, the #1 constituent call or email we received in my office was about transportation. It was also a constant topic of conversation during some of my education town halls. There is no reason a child should be losing classroom time because the bus was late or didn't show up, or worse, drove past. Our students shouldn't be left on the curb early in the morning or when their parents entrust BPS to get their kids to school on time and safely. I have heard stories of students being dropped off at the wrong location, arriving late to school, missing breakfast, which is the most important meal of the day, and in some cases, bus routes changing without parent notification. We've also heard we've received lots of feedback for children who have missed substantial amounts of time in classroom every single day due to tardy buses. Certain options of transportation are also not provided to all, such as extending the route of an MBTA bus to drop off students directly at school. I do, however, want to be fair and acknowledge that the BPS Transportation Department, especially Dell, who's here with us today, has worked very hard to fix many of the issues that families who have reached out, myself who has reached out, my colleagues who have reached out and reported those problems. I certainly don't want today's conversation to be an attack on Dell or John or Becky, but to be really a conversation about how do we improve service and find solutions for our students, because these issues will continue to happen. Again, it's a high priority for me to alleviate as much of this stress as possible for our families and our kids. It's frustrating to continue to have this problem year after year. I'm not sure if we should just be at a point where we say, we're always going to have these problems and move on to the next thing. But that's certainly not great for our families who especially have young kids who are often waiting alone at bus stops, either in the morning or in the afternoon, because timing is off by a substantial amount. I think that it's important to be creative and be thoughtful about this work and find solutions together. I open now for opening remarks. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having this hearing today. I appreciate your coming here today to have this, I think, very important conversation. It's true, one of the top issues that I get from my office when it comes to education and BPS schools is the movement of the kids. My district, District 1, has, I think, some of the most topical and geographical difficulties, the most difficult area to actually move kids around. Because we have such waterfront, because East Boston is an island, we are dealing with, I think, an additional burden that you didn't obviously create. But there are, I think in some of your documents even noted that this particular school or this particular geographic area from East Boston has a special kind of burden for our kids, especially when we're asking for age groups as young as, or for high school students to take the T. You understand for many of us that's at least 2 T stops in exchange and plus several buses for our kids to get out of East Boston. I'm not unaware of the kids who also have the challenges to get to East Boston and the amount of effort it takes to get from Dorchester or other parts of the city to get up to school in East Boston, Charlestown, or the North End. But access to schools is directly related to transportation. It's a civil rights issue. And so things that I will be going into and asking more direct questions, I see you have a presentation very likely, will deal with the fact that we have busing right now going on from Charlestown to, or excuse me, from East Boston to Charlestown for East Boston kids because we lack a middle school or 6th grade or 7th grade option. And I think that there's a way in which the school budget could be ironed out to hopefully save our high school despite the budget cuts, but also maybe stop busing kids all the way over to Charlestown. 80% of the Edwards kids live in East Boston. We also have a student who's had repeated issues with getting access to a bus to get on time to school, and he has special needs, and he's been missing breakfast. We did, for a time, assure that he got on there, but now he's calling again, wondering how and why his son is not able to get on the bus. I think it had to do with the bus monitors being late. Then we also are dealing with students who have IDP, or who have special needs, who are on the bus longer than the hour that I believe is recommended, and we are wanting to figure out how to make sure that those kids are not further damaged by being on the bus too long. I think I'd love to hear about ultimately how you are balancing your opportunity index analysis, where you do look, and I think it's great, at schools that can raise a certain amount of resources on their own, and making sure that when you are giving out public resources that they're allocated equally, and also acknowledging, or at least considering the fact that schools are able to raise a lot of resources. So I think the Opportunity Index should also be looking at transportation, especially when schools are given MBTA buses and able to move around differently than other schools, and how BPS can help compensate for that to make sure the opportunity is truly spread around. And I also think in general, there is a question of how much would it cost, and I don't accept that it's going to be too much. I want to know how much it would cost to bus every student in BPS to schools, to BPS schools, instead of just simply saying we just can't afford it. I don't believe, unless you have a goal, or unless you actually know what the price is, that it's ever an acceptable thing to say it's too much. So those are some of the questions guiding my questioning today, and I'll go into further detail with some case studies and some concerns. And finally, looking at the equity issue when it comes to Boston Latin Academy and other, the O'Brien, for example, that gets no bus actually from East Boston. These are questions that we have, I think, this as a matter of equity, out of fairness, that the BPS needs to explain.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. We've also been joined by Councilor O'Malley, who is not going to give opening statements, but will make up for his time with questions, I'm sure.
Indeed.
And thank you to the three of you for being here, and I look forward to this presentation.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. My name is John Hanlon. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Boston Public Schools. With me today are Becky Schuster, Assistant Superintendent of Equity, and Delaverne Stanislaus, Director of Transportation, who I might add, once upon a time, took public transportation from Hyde Park to Charleston High School when she was a student in BPS. We have before you a presentation. Per your hearing order, we believe that we'll address some of the concerns that you brought up in your opening remarks. Thank you for that feedback initially. I'm not going to spend much time in this initial introduction, other than to say that we appreciate your kind words. We do believe that the team is doing everything that they can to provide safe and reliable transportation in a cost-efficient way for all of our students. And in ways beyond Yellow Bus, we're trying to provide opportunities for all of our students to access not just educational resources, but resources across the city, some of that being borne out by the recent agreement with the MBTA to expand the M7 T-Pass offerings, which we'll get to later in this presentation. With that, I'll pass it to Delaverne to begin the presentation. Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start with alternative transportation. 75% of alternative transportation requests that we've received in the Transportation Department has been approved this school year. Alternative transportation is supplementary service Boston Public Schools Department of Transportation provides upon request and is not guaranteed. BPS approves alternative pickup or drop-off locations if they do not add time to the route and if there is sufficient capacity on the bus. Alternative location includes after-school programs and caregivers' homes. 75% of the 2,791 requests submitted this school year have been approved. State and federal regulations do not require alternative drop-off or pickups. We have yet to find another program comparable to the service level we provide here in the city of Boston. We're going to move on to yellow shuttle bus services. The Transportation Department provides 50 shuttle buses to 11 middle and high schools from major transit hubs in the city. Cost estimate for these shuttles are $1.4 million. This service is not required based on state or federal regulations. On the map shown in the slide shows specific schools and the specific schools where shuttle buses are allocated. Similar to alternative transportation, this is an additional service we provide that's not required. I will share in a later slide the criteria for why we provide this service to certain schools. On the next slide, you'll see a breakdown of middle and high schools that we provide yellow bus shuttles to, the number of shuttles that we provide, both AM and PM. There are 57 BPS schools that serve 7th through 12th grades that we do not provide shuttle bus service to. Some schools are assigned more shuttle buses in the PM versus the AM. This is because previously, one bus made multiple trips to and from schools and pickup location. Because of timing issues with this system, transportation added additional buses so that each bus now only makes one trip. BPS yellow shuttle bus criteria. Supplemental yellow shuttle bus service is provided based on specific criteria. Length of the walking distance from the nearest MBTA subway or bus stop to the school, frequency of accessible MBTA service, Boston Police Department assessment of foot traffic and safety. I'm going to now pass the slides to Becky Schuster.
Good afternoon. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about requests that we receive on a regular basis from families requesting additional yellow bus shuttles. And the reason why I'm the person delivering this section of the presentation is that we always hold these requests to an equity lens. And in the area of transportation, generally our goal is actually equality, not equity, in the sense that we are not running extra school buses, for example, to communities that have the highest needs. What we're trying to do is actually ensure that all of our children get to school in a reasonable amount of time and have similar levels of service. So in terms of the shuttle buses, the yellow bus service, whenever we have requests for increased service, we are always comparing those requests to the criteria that Del just reviewed, where we have a very consistent policy of which routes justify a yellow shuttle bus and which do not. So, for example, we have received requests from Charlestown and North End residents asking for additional bus service specifically to Boston Latin Academy. And these requests, when we've reviewed them, are not consistent with the criteria that we have set and applied across the district. We also have requests to provide yellow bus service for all high school students. And this request, as much as I have no doubt every person in this room would love to provide it, I myself am a parent of an 8th grader, so there's nothing I would like more than to have a yellow bus come to my house or my corner or even a few blocks away, and it does not. But this would present significant logistical, financial, and environmental challenges. And as Councilor Edwards was asking about earlier, we did do a cost estimate of approximately $63 million were we to provide yellow bus service for all high school students. This would require approximately 500 additional buses, obviously adding to traffic in the city of Boston, as well as increasing greenhouse emissions. And we've made an estimate here that it would be 23 million pounds of carbon dioxide additional emissions per school year. In the past, the Office of Equity has actually very carefully reviewed every yellow shuttle bus route to ensure that the criteria were consistent. There are a handful of shuttle buses that fall outside of those criteria, and generally that's because of where there are schools that when we made the transition to a home-based school assignment, there were some small number of students who are slowly but surely working their way through the system who are outside of the traditional transportation area for their schools, and therefore it was a hardship to those individual students, and we needed to provide an extra level of service. So here's one way to look at the types of equity concerns that are raised when we consider additional shuttle buses. This is a chart that contrasts service for Charlestown, East Boston, and the North End to Boston Latin Academy, which, as people here are probably familiar, is located in the sort of near Franklin Park. If we look at our students who are currently traveling to Charlestown High School from neighborhoods that are either as far away as that first commute that we just described to BLA, or even further, because of course it's further from Mattapan, for example, to Charlestown than it is from Charlestown to BLA, we find that a very significant number of our students are traveling in the other direction and not receiving yellow shuttle bus service because we are applying these consistent criteria across the district. Okay, so now we're going to move on to, John is going to speak about our public transportation for our 7th through 12th graders and M7 passes.
Excellent. Thank you, Becky. As many of our counselors know, M7 T-passes are provided to 7th through 12th graders to take public transportation to school. In providing these T-passes to our students up through this year, we've provided a simple criteria based on how far away the students live from school. In grades 7 and 8, if you live beyond 1.5 miles, and in grades 9 through 12, if you live beyond 2 miles, then you would receive an M7 T-pass. The M7 T-pass is good 7 days a week, multiple rides per day, 10 months out of the year, so essentially September through June. The MBTA also provides supplemental, what they call S-bus service, where regular MBTA capacity is insufficient. So in some cases, people refer to these as MBTA shuttle buses because they act a little bit differently from the regular routes that MBTA buses run, although they do run along designated MBTA pathways or routes. The MBTA, in providing this service, adds to about 200 trips daily, 70 in the morning and 130 in the PM, to key routes to transport additional riders, many of them being our students going to and from school. As I was careful to say in presenting that slide, this is what we've been providing up through this year. We're very excited, as I know that you all know, to announce the change in that provision of services as of the 1920 school year ahead. We were successful in collaborating with the MBTA to negotiate a new deal that would allow all of our students in grades 7 through 12, all Boston students attending school in Boston and going to school in Boston, to receive M7 T-passes for that 10-month period. That amounts to roughly 10,000 additional students, or a 50% increase in the number of students receiving these T-passes. It's an incredible investment that the mayor is making. It's an incredible move that the MBTA is making to signal their continued partnership with both the school district and our students and families. We're very happy to say that this amounts to nothing more than a $500,000 investment beyond what we were planning to spend in FY20 already. And with that additional $500,000, we're providing, again, an additional 10,000 T-passes to our students. It's also extremely important to note that we do not see this effort simply as a means of providing transportation to and from school. Rather, we're seeing it as something that's fundamental within Build BPS, something that's fundamental within the way that we would prefer to govern within the city, in that we want our students and families to see our city as a classroom. We want our students to be able to access resources all across Boston, whether it be museums or parks or jobs or internships, or simply being able to form tighter friendships with students, fellow students at school. One of the principles of this hearing was equity. And I submit that this effort that we have made with the MBTA is directly in line with our mission around equity, to provide equity to our students. We know that there has been inequity in the past, that some of our students have been able to access resources across town, whereas others haven't. We believe that this does a fair job of closing that gap so that all of our students now can access resources across the city. And with that, I will close and ask for questions, but in doing so, I think it's good to end on that note of equity because, as I said before, the team here and back at the bowling building works tirelessly every day to provide safe and reliable, on-time transportation for our students, but also aims to do it day in and day out with equity foremost in mind. Thank you.
And thank you all for your presentation. Becky, just one point of clarification. You had said that all of us would like all of our kids to have access to yellow bus support service or transportation. I would not.
Really?
I don't think we need 500 more buses.
I didn't mean it like that.
and I
didn't
don't
mean
think we
thought
need
it should
to
happen,
spend
but rather it would be
63.
nice if it would happen. Nice.
Million more dollars.
Yes, I'm with
I
you.
have a quick question about the slide that has the breakdown on the yellow shuttle bus services. How did we determine the AM and PM shuttles, and what's the capacity of those buses? Are they being filled to capacity? Is that why we've added additional buses as opposed to looping the same bus?
So the AM versus the PM, in the past, we had buses that would do multiple trip for students, particularly Charlestown High, East Boston. But because of time with the routes, we had to add additional shuttles. The buses are usually filled to capacity. We've had a few people go out and make sure that kids are riding buses. And we had to add more shuttle buses to particularly these two schools because of the timing issues with our routes in the PM.
And why did we decide, so I worked at East Boston High for a number of years. I know the yellow bus that you're talking about at the end of the day, because a lot of our kids would sort of rush out of the building to catch that bus. But why did we choose to put a shuttle bus at Eastie High or at Charlestown High? Is it because the walk is too long, or is it because where neighbors have asked to keep the kids off the streets? What is the reason for putting those shuttle buses there? Because it's not that long of a walk from Eastie High to, I think it's Meridian Street, where they could catch the MBTA.
So it is foot traffic through the neighborhoods that folks have gotten complaints about and things of that nature.
Yeah, typically when we provide that service, it's to get students that last sort of fraction of the way to school, whether it be yellow buses at Ruggles Station that take students to Latin Academy, or a yellow bus in East Boston that takes students that last mile or so to the school. As the crow flies, it might not be that long of a walk, but it is still a walk that we'd prefer for the students to avoid, and we have had complaints from communities in the past about numbers of students walking through the neighborhood to get to school. So we've tried to mitigate that with the bus service.
Yeah, it's a horror when people move in next to a big high school and they imagine there might be kids walking to and from school in the morning. I'd also say, I think it would be interesting to look at those shuttle buses in proximity to MBTA spots, especially for our high school kids that now in the new year will all have M7 cards to hop on the T.
And just,
I would just-
Counselor, if I may,
Sure.
I'm sorry, Becky. I would just remind folks that that criterion that I mentioned about community complaints, believe me, that is not at the top of our priority list. It sometimes plays into it and might sort of tip the scales for the need of a bus that we already thought could be there anyway.
I'd say for
Yeah,
like
I was-
Eastie High,
that's-
it's at the top of a hill, so maybe in the morning, getting the kids up that hill to school on time. But walking downhill is pretty easy at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was going to underline the same thing that John was saying, that I know, for example, with the Charlestown High, when the Office of Equity did our analysis of all the yellow shuttle bus services, that particular one was one where the Boston Police Department felt strongly that there was a safety issue around the foot traffic, so it wasn't just the neighborhood having upset, but rather an actual safety concern.
Right.
And then you mentioned the collaborative nature between the M7, the investment for next year with the MBTA. What is the MBTA contributing to this?
They're contributing a lot. In the past, we would have a rate per pass per student per month. That would be $29 per month for every one of our students that we provide service for. And remember, too, that it's not just for BPS students in grades 7 through 12, but also charter students and other private and parochial students that we provide that service for. What we've been able to negotiate with the MBTA is a flat rate for FY20 of $6.7 million, which is, as I mentioned before, a $500,000 increase above what we had been planning to spend for M7T passes for our students. So what the MBTA has done is they've broken away from the per pass methodology, so to speak, to allow us to have a flat rate. If you actually do the math, and divide the roughly 30,000 passes into the $6.7 million, it ends up being far, far cheaper than $29 per month. So what you could say the MBTA has done is, well, quite frankly, quite a bit. I mean, they're allowing us to purchase 10,000 more passes at $500,000, which is an incredible discount on the rate that we would typically pay for that many more T-passes.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. So I had alerted to several topics that I wanted to dive deeper into, but my understanding is especially since you ended with the T and equity, my understanding is by BPS's own research, when moving to T-passes for 7th and 8th graders, BLA was found to be one of the most inaccessible schools on the T. It is more than a mile from the train station and a mile from Dudley, and it is only accessible by buses. So compound that for folks, kids coming with the challenge of living in more isolated, again, geographically, you didn't control the geography of Charlestown and East Boston. There seems to be an extra added burden, though in the move for equity, it's still not equitable for those kids who are coming from East Boston and Charlestown, or you can argue going up to East Boston and Charlestown. There's not equity still, even when moving to the T-passes, they have a special burden. And so I believe at some point BPS in their history had provided a bus actually from East Boston, from Maverick to BLA to compensate for that difficulty. And I'm curious why we no longer provide that bus.
Del, I'll have to defer to you in answering that. What I would say, though, from the chart from slide 6, which I think is clear, is that if we're talking about one specific school here, and that school being Boston Latin Academy, you can see that that school receives far more shuttle service than all of the other schools in that chart. So we are trying to accommodate the needs of those students, knowing that there is a distance to go from, say, Ruggles Station, where many of our yellow school buses will pick them up and bring them to BLA. I can't speak with any details on the bus that may have been provided in the past. I don't know for a fact if it was or if it wasn't. I know that in the past, the MBTA provided a bus that they no longer provide, one of those S buses that I referred to. I can't speak to the reasons why that bus is no longer in service. Del, I don't know if you can speak to the yellow school bus that we might have had.
So I am not aware of the additional bus from East Boston directly. The only additional bus that I'm aware of was Ruggles Station that was taken away because there was low ridership on the bus.
So what we're experiencing, I think, is a good thing in East Boston. We're finding more and more of our kids getting into the exam schools, especially BLA and the O'Brien. And so the O'Brien gets no bus services from East Boston. Is there a particular reason in your equity understanding why?
Yeah, generally, the O'Brien is so close to an Orange Line stop that it doesn't justify yellow shuttle bus service.
Okay. And so moving on to several specific cases that I had mentioned, or actually I'm gonna go into some more specific questions. So one of the students I'm particularly concerned about is the IEP students. He is consistently on the bus for more than an hour. So I'm curious, do you track travel time by student and by the IEP students?
So do we track travel time? Yes, we track travel time, and certainly we know how long the routes are, and we also know that unfortunately, we have cause for many of our students to traverse the city at great lengths. This is something that we talked about in our last transportation hearing just a few weeks ago, the fact that many of our schools are pulling students from all across the city. There has been talk in the past about a legal 1-hour limit. That's only the case in terms of students with special needs, at which point families would sign a waiver allowing for a travel time in excess of an hour. We have some students who live in Alston-Brighton and have IEPs that take them to school in Dorchester. And when you're attending school at 8:30 in the morning coming from Alston-Brighton to Dorchester, I don't mean to sound defeatist, but it's quite frankly impossible to do many of those trips in under an hour. And as it is, one question or criticism we hear of quite a bit is, why are your buses empty, or why are your buses only having a few students on them. This is why, because we do have a number of students who go great distances to get from home to school, and in order to do that, you can only take a couple students on those buses in order to make it there in a reasonable amount of time. Certainly, we aim to have as short a time on the bus for our students as you possibly can. It's just not feasible in some cases, particularly where our special education programs are, where our students live, where families choose to go to school. Again, we try to do everything we can to accommodate those needs, but in some cases, it's not feasible.
Right, but in all cases, it's a legal requirement if they have special needs for them to stay or within that hour, am I correct?
You are correct, except
So,
for the fact that
unless-
we ask families to fill out a waiver if it's not possible. So if you're attending school...
So in my case, she didn't sign a waiver.
Well, then
So-
I think what we should do is follow up with you offline to get the information for that particular family. It
We
could be that
certainly
we are very
have.
well aware of that family
Yeah.
already. And it could be that we need to work with the special education department or the Office of Assignment to figure out a different placement for that student. Again, we're not willingly putting students on buses knowing it's going to take them an hour and 10 minutes when we can avoid it. If they're placed at a school that's across town, there is, again, I do not mean to sound defeatist or defensive. There is just quite frankly nothing we can do in some cases to be able to beat the commute and beat the rush hour and get the students to a certain location across Boston in under an hour in some cases, and it's not a very large number of cases.
This is from Charlestown to East Boston, and it's dealing with a kid in the elementary school. So just in terms of distance and in terms of travel. So
We should look into that.
I heard the buzzer, so I have many, many more
Yeah, we'll do a
questions.
couple
So
of
many, many
rounds
more
then.
rounds to go.
And I do want to note that we've been joined by Counselor Janey and Counselor Flynn. Counselor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilor Edwards, for your leadership in authoring this. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. John, if my math is correct, and it should be because I'm an alumnus of Boston Public Schools, increasing 30,000, a total pool of 30,000 students, 10 at a $500,000 increment, $6.7 million flat rate over 10 months works out to about $22 a month as opposed to $29 per month. So that is real savings and a better negotiated price. So that's a good partnership with the T. I think there's better opportunities for more partnerships with the T, but well done on that, and obviously commend the mayor for his efforts on this. This will be a very, very important step for high school and middle school students. Can you talk briefly, I don't think you got into it, but I know this has come up before about S-buses, supplemental buses, and isn't federal policy which dictates a lot of that, given the fact that there are significantly more people on the routes? I thought that was my understanding, that there was some federal policy that provided for those supplemental buses. Perhaps
I'm asking Peter Crossan to come down. Many of you, if not all of you, have heard from Peter Crossan before at previous city council hearings. Peter is our liaison to the MBTA. He's our fleet and compliance manager. I'd ask that he address that question. As he's getting seated, what I would say as far as the M7 discount is concerned, I could have given you that $22 amount earlier. What we're looking at it as, there are 30,000 passes that will be out there next year. It's hard to look at it as a per pass amount because many of those students we know still actually won't be riding. But when you do the math, yes, it's a fantastic discount.
Yeah.
And when you do the math at the 500,000 for the extra 10,000, it's $5 a month, which is amazing.
Great.
Peter?
So the MBTA receives funds from the Federal Transit Administration to purchase buses, and there are restrictions on the use of those funds. And there are two very distinct restrictions. One is that they will not fund buses if a contractor is available to do it or had previously done it. So if the MBTA was found to be operating a trip, it would take but one contractor to say, I could have done that trip, and that would jeopardize their equipment funding. When it comes to school children, there's something called school tripper service. They cannot run exclusive service for school children only. What they can do is run the regular route. So any of the S buses that are operated that serve primarily children at certain hours have to stop at every single stop an adult is present and make every stop. So the majority of them do just that. If they don't allow regular passengers aboard, then they cannot perform the service. So it's not exclusive. Now, let's be candid. most adults along the line will choose to take a different bus than the bus that has, 50 or 60 high school students. Matt, in your area, the 36 is supplemented. The 36 bus goes to West Roxbury, and then there are school buses also that supplement that. Some of those buses that come from West Roxbury and Hyde Park continue on. And one of the reasons they do that is that, for example, some buses continue on to Townsend and Humboldt for BLA, and some continue on to Boston Latin. That eliminates 300 or 400 students getting off and waiting on the platform, and they run out of platform space. And we have about 5,000 kids that flood through that station, so they continue on. Now, any adult, for example, the bus that comes, the 32 will come in, the 34, a number of them will come in.
38,
through,
37,
yes,
yeah.
that's correct. Any adult can get on that bus at Forest Hills and continue on to Humboldt and Townsend as well. And some adults do that. The 32 is running a 4-minute headway, so they're adding capacity. But it's a question of they'd be in violation of their funding covenants, and that's why they don't do it. Now, I think the other question that's often asked is, why do I see buses lined up at Boston Latin? Well, you see buses lined up at Boston Latin because there's not room to park 13 MBTA buses on Huntington Avenue, and they originate their trip there. The BLA buses, a number of them will start their loop, be it a 28 to Mattapan or a bus like that. Rather than starting at Dudley Station, they'll make the loop starting at BLA, collect the students, go down to Mattapan, and come back. So they're just doing the loop in a little bit different manner.
No, I appreciate that context. I knew there was some federal guidelines that sort of further complicated what you all can and cannot do, and also the capacity is absolutely a crucial part as well.
That's correct. And I think, seeing that you're from JP West Roxbury, I think the 36 is a good example,
Yeah.
where there are school day services only where they supplement adults, the regular capacity to handle the students.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much. Last thing, because for this round, I did another back of the envelope on the per pupil spending. And this is something that we've brought up in the past. If you're looking at charter corner versus door-to-door, about 91% of charter school students whom we transport are picked up at the corner, 9% are door-to-door. Obviously, private parochial, it's even greater. It's 334 students are picked up at the corner. One student is picked up private parochial. But at BPS, it's 72% are picked up at the corner and 28% are door-to-door. Admittedly, it's a much larger pool. Admittedly, many more kids who have special circumstances and require special needs, and that's obviously something that we should do. But I wonder, has there been an effort to try to move kids, or maybe when they get older, from that door-to-door pickup to the corner pickup, which I would think would be safe, would be great for them to sort of, just the benefits are measurable. Some kids can't, and I understand that, and you all understand that. But are there efforts to move kids from door to door to corner? And that'll be my last for this round.
My understanding is that when a student's individualized education plan or IEP is reviewed, always part of that review is whether each component of that plan still needs to remain as they get older, and one of those components is door-to-door. So we do see some students who, as they grow older and they're developmentally advancing, are moved from door-to-door to corner service. It is a discussion that happens that includes the family and the educators that work with that young person.
I would also add, Counselor, that a new accommodation level, let's call it, that we began last year, and we piloted in the 17-18 school year, had it again in the 18-19 school year, is what we're calling accommodated corner. And that's a bit of a middle ground between door-to-door and corner. And what that might mean is if you live halfway down a dead-end street, and for years and years you've been picked up at door-to-door, but now you've progressed enough to the point where you no longer need that level of accommodation, but can't actually walk the 3.5 blocks to get to the corner that your bus typically serves, maybe you can walk to the end of your street, and what we call nearest corner or accommodated corner is how you'd be picked up at that point. And that's been something that we've been working closely with the special education office on, so as to increase the let's call it adoption rate of that service among students with IEP door-to-door accommodations. The last thing I'll add there is We also have a program for students with typically severe cognitive disabilities called the STRIVE program. One of the features of the STRIVE program is to do travel training with students, particularly those students who are at an older age, nearing the end of their time within BPS. We might do travel training so that they can be educated themselves on how to actually access public transportation from their home and get to school. And we have people from within that program who go with those students day in and day out for a short period of time to the point where they're now able to do it on their own, and then they come off of yellow bus service.
Great. No, thank you all. That's all for this round. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Janey.
It'll work.
1, 2, 1, 2. Thank you. Just building on the door-to-door, certainly any child who needs door-to-door should continue to receive door-to-door services. I'm not as optimistic as you are, Becky, that there is a systemic approach to really addressing this issue. I am encouraged to hear the accommodated corner approach. I think that gives our young people much more independence and still meets the needs for those who require some sort of pickup closer to their home, which is great. But I would encourage, and I think I raised this at the last transportation hearing that we had through Ways and Means around looking at door-to-door more closely to make sure those who are able to walk further, that they actually do that.
Can I just add one comment, Councilor Jenny, that I initially shared your concern, and I do think we need to continue to work with our special education coordinators to look at this issue, but we did actually run an analysis to see, I was concerned that perhaps some parents were more successful at advocating for their children to receive door-to-door than others, and we specifically ran a racial analysis and broke out who gets door-to-door, and the proportion of students receiving door-to-door is the same as our proportions of special education students by race.
And how many have actually moved to the corner? So when you say that there's movement happening and folks are,
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
We've seen, to be fair, we've seen a slow take-up rate of that accommodated corner, particularly last year. I don't know the numbers offhand, but I can tell you it was a very small portion of our ridership. We had the accommodated corner statistics in our last presentation back toward the end of February. I would ask you to reference that, and we can certainly pull it back up and share it with you.
so I'm going to just skip ahead and get, so we've got very limited time. So page 7 on the slide. And perhaps you covered this in your presentation. I came in midway through. If you could just provide a little more detail on this criteria. So when you say the length of a walking distance from an MBTA subway stop or bus stop, what is the actual length? When we talk about the frequency of service, what is the actual schedule that you want to see? And then I'd like to understand more about this foot traffic issue.
So, slides.
Slide 7
It's this one.
on the criteria.
A good example of this would be West Roxbury High School. The distance of the school from like Forest Hills, Ruggles Station is a couple miles, and students, it's not realistic for students to walk from
So my
Forest
question,
Hills.
though, is what is the length of distance? So is it a half mile, is it a mile, is it 2 miles, is it 3 miles? Like what will then trigger the shuttle bus? What is the actual distance?
What I would say is we can look that up for you. I don't believe, this is myself talking, I'm not technically in the Department of Transportation making those decisions, but I believe that there's no finite distance, because in the cases where we provide that service, it's so obvious that the subway station is so far away that there's no need for an actual cutoff point. In other cases where the subway station might be a little bit closer to the school, like for example Sullivan Square and Charlestown High, it might be more of a safety issue, as Becky Schuster mentioned earlier, around BPD's concerns. So I think it's I think it would be incorrect to say that there's hard and fast thresholds that we have to look at each of these criteria, because when it happens, it's very obviously fitting one of these criteria, and if that makes sense.
Right, and West Roxbury is certainly very far from the T. Yeah, I guess, so how do you then ensure the equity piece if there isn't hard, fast criteria, number one? And two, what is this foot traffic issue? Is this that, neighbors who live near a school are annoyed by the presence of young people? Or are we actually concerned about the safety of our young people?
Yeah, I can speak to this. So twice now, over the last few years, the Office of Equity has run an analysis of the yellow shuttle bus service to make sure that consistent criteria are being applied. And both times, we found that nearly all of the shuttles fit very consistent criteria that Del went over earlier. There are a very small number that fall outside of those criteria and have specific situations associated with them. But overall, they are using very consistent criteria to determine. And in terms of the foot traffic, generally, it's been an issue raised by Boston Police Department. It's very few of our shuttles are there because of foot traffic, but there are a few where there have been concerns with, for example, students crossing particular streets that the police have concluded are dangerous for our students, this kind of concern. Does it ever happen that we also have neighborhood concerns about hundreds of students walking a particular way every day? Yes, but generally these have arisen directly from police department concerns about just having that many students walking a particular route at a particular time every day.
Do they have the same concern about students gathering at Forest Hills Station?
Peter, do you want to
And
talk
that's,
to
I
that?
know that my buzzer's gone off, but I do have more questions, so I will wait.
Peter
But I am
Crossan is
curious,
going to speak
because
to that.
Forest Hill Station is known for being a station with high volume of students as well as incidents in terms of fights breaking out among our young people who often converge coming from different schools. And so when the schools, the children themselves, perhaps they have beef with other schools, that there are issues. But then after this, I want to make sure that Councilor Flynn gets in and I can come back during the second round. Thank you.
So I can speak to Forest Hills. I've been at Forest Hills for over 800 mornings where students transfer from MBTA service to the buses that are going to West Roxbury High School. In the case of West Roxbury High School, the T runs some supplemental service, which are primarily 36 buses, out to Millennium Park now, which is the new playground in back of, or the new fields behind West Roxbury High School. There's a new station there. We supplement the supplementals. They don't have the capacity to take all the West Roxbury High School students. So we have students transfer from incoming buses from a variety of neighborhoods and get onto school buses. That also reduces somewhat the number of kids in Forest Hill Station. The other thing is that the MBTA has Project Stopwatch, which is a combination of MBTA police, Boston Public Schools officials, street workers, an assortment of community organizations that man these T stations every day at the time schools get out. And the T Police publish a bulletin every day of what particular T-stop they're focusing on and what the issues have been. And those community partners, including myself, can attend a MBTA police briefing 3 times a week. So we work very, very closely with the MBTA on issues like that. The officers at Forest Hills, I know them all. They come down. I have participated. I have been there a couple of days when there have been problems, and we do have a lot of students. And if you think sometimes we have students from different parts of the city and different neighborhoods, and where do they converge? They converge at MBTA stations. But they invest quite a bit in Project Stopwatch.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor James.
Thank you.
Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Asabi George. Thank you to the panelists for being here. One question I had, or comment I should say, is I had a few parents mention to me, and some advocates mentioned to me, the Safe Routes to School program. I've had some parents and advocates reach out to me praising the program for engaging students to be active, safe, and promote physical activity through their walk to school. They've indicated it's a positive experience for the community as well and for families. Could you speak a little bit about the program and what is happening with it, or any background information you might have?
Yeah, he should just stay on the panel.
So Peter Carson's coming down. I can give an introductory comment on that. We're very proud of that program. At the same time, it does not operate in a vast number of schools across BPS. I don't know the number offhand, but it's a fraction of our schools. One of my favorite days every year is when I join one of the schools for their safe routes to schools sort of walking bus day. This past fall, I was at the Sarah Greenwood, and last year I was at the Mather. It's always an exciting day to see the smiles on the kids and getting them out in the sunshine walking to school. We are also partnering right now with BTD and others on a grant program to allow us to expand the Safe Routes to School program with a particular focus on the Ellis School area in Roxbury to allow for Safe Routes to School pathways for children attending that school to go aligned with a lot of the other schools where we already have this program. One of the features of the program is walking maps that we have at the schools that participate that they then distribute to their students and families, so students are aware of the Safe Routes to Schools for each of the schools that they attend. We also have staff that we work with at the Boston Public Health Commission, BTD, obviously BPS Transportation. It's a real multi-sector and multi-department effort to pull this off. Peter might have more details than I, though.
Well, I have good news. We've advanced to the second round on the Safe Routes to School grant. We applied for a $1 million grant to focus on a corridor that extends from the David Ellis, which is on Walnut Street, if you can think Walnut and Seaver, all the way down to the Trotter School and along the way. One of the things that has happened in the last couple of years is with Waze and other applications like that, neighborhoods that were one time very quiet will see an awful lot of traffic that they hadn't previously seen. And that has caused issues, particularly in East Boston recently, as you've probably heard, and many other streets. So we have done, Safe Routes involves a number of things. It involves student education. It involves a walking school bus in some cases. It involves the walks that they talk about. But it also involves flex posts at crosswalks, crossing guards, new school flashing lights, chevrons and other pavement devices to slow traffic down. The corridor that we're speaking about for the $1 million grant will go from the David Ellis all the way down to the Boys Club and YMCA's on Warren Street. That's a divided street. When it's physically divided, motorists do not have to stop on the other side of the physical barrier. So in addition to that, we formed a BTD BPS DOT partnership 7 years ago to address issues surrounding students and the routes that they take to school and around school buildings themselves, particularly with more parents driving their children to school every day. We have horrendous traffic jams and other concerns, and we've probably done over 100 sites, and we have 20 sites that we're working on now. Heath Street, where the Hennigan is, there's a new stairwell that came down from Mission Hill, and we're putting a crosswalk in there. And we're also moving the MBTA spot, which is outside the West Zone ELC, and adding a handicapped parking spot and making room for buses to queue. So it's essentially anything that's related to students getting to and from school. We also have worked in a lot of neighborhoods where buses had difficulty making the turn because cars were parked too close to the corner or it wasn't a tangent street. So there's a variety of issues that we've taken, and it's been a very successful program. It's almost hard to keep up with the demand, but I talk with BTD almost every day.
Well, thank you for that excellent information, and I hear great things about the program, and if there's any way that the City Council can be helpful, especially during the budget process, please let me know. I'd love to help out any way I can. And then my final question is, I often get calls or emails from residents in South Boston on D Street, right out in front of the Condon School, there's a bike lane right in front of the school, and obviously that's where the buses pull up to drop kids off, and sometimes parents pull up to drop kids off. It's a narrow street as well, as you probably know. But is there anything we could do? Maybe we can talk offline, but just I'd just like to have a better safety plan on D Street as it relates to the Condon School.
Well, D Street's a very hard place to have a school and to have as many buses. And we also have buses on the side. All of
Yeah.
our wheelchair buses are there. There have been a couple of schools where bus lane or bike lanes were installed in the school loading zone, and we have been moving those. It's a problem. School buses are required by law to park as close to the curb for every stop, so I will check into that conflict there. It seems inevitably there's a fire engine coming down at the same time
Right.
school's letting out, so it's a tough place.
And I just want to point out the crossing guard that works there is excellent. She's very professional. I live on the same street as the Condon, and I see her every day, and she's a great credit to the city of Boston and to the school department as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. We've talked a lot about the necessary relationship between the MBTA buses, our school buses, transportation in general. When we talk about the length of walking distance from any of our schools from a T stop or not, or if one doesn't exist, let me start over here. What's the conversation that's happening with the T about improving service routes so that they can get closer to school communities? Not replace a bus service, but get closer to, so that we are relying less on shuttling kids with yellow buses?
Well, the MBTA works under a set of regulations that are as onerous as school transportation, and they have to determine how many transit-dependent individuals there are and locate their stops within a certain distance. I don't recall the exact distance, but there's a criteria that they have to follow to receive the funds that they receive. So that would be up to the MBTA. They are doing the Better Bus Project, is trying to address a number of those. Although I should state that the Better Bus Project does not change any of the existing S routes. But on an annual basis, we get together with the T to look at S-bus service as students, as some schools grow and other schools get smaller.
Right, it's not necessarily the S buses, it's regular bus routes, especially if we're investing, at a discount in all of these M7s. We want more and more kids, especially the older kids, in my opinion, to ride those MBTA buses, especially where it makes sense. But through design of those bus routes, it can make better sense to get more of those kids on yellow buses, on MBTA buses.
Yeah, once again, they have to follow the regular route. And so changing an MBTA...
We can change the regular route, though.
They can, but there's a
Right.
process that they have to go through in community meetings and all of that. So the only deviations they really have is they make different stops. I use the 36 to West Roxbury. Some of those buses terminate at the VA hospital, others at the Charles River Loop, others at River Works, where the River something behind Home Depot because of the number of manufacturing firms, and then some stop, terminate or turn at Millennium Park based on what groups of people were coming and going. So there's a criteria that I'm not familiar with all of the criteria, but it's quite an onerous procedure for them to change.
Yeah, no doubt, but I think our students in particular, our students and their families in the Boston Public Schools become a community group that could be advocating for better bus routes that could also service our kids, the teachers in those buildings, other people that want to access the school as well.
Just, Counselor, one thing I would add that I think is noteworthy in this context, as part of our rollout of this expanded M7 program, we're going to be working with the MBTA to launch a service impact focus group that will run starting soon and likely extend deep into the 1920 school year, maybe beyond, pulling in a cross-sector representation of folks to include students from the Boston Student Advisory Committee, staff from BPS, staff from the MBTA, staff from the Boston Transportation Department, potentially community members as well, so that we're watching for any service impacts that come about from adding more and more students to the MBTA next year. We see the purpose of that focus group not just to monitor the impacts that are felt by the expanded M7 offering, but also to come up with recommendations for both MBTA and BPS transportation on how to alleviate any concerns that come about from this expanded offering next year.
Great, thank you. And then my next question's regarding slide 9, where we looked at the number of students that are traveling from one part of the city to another. I'm curious with the number of kids going to Charlestown High, for example, how many of those students are being administratively assigned versus choosing that school? Because I think that becomes a question of families not choosing Charlestown High, but getting assigned to Charlestown High for lots of different reasons. And then it adds to the deeper question of why are they not choosing a school closer to home? And so what's prohibiting them from doing that? Becky looks like she might be ready for an answer.
No, I understand your questions. I don't know the answer, but I'm sure we can find out for you what percentage are administratively assigned to Charlestown.
Yeah, we can try to provide that for you. It's hard for us to say right now. There's a number of different reasons why students choose schools. We could find out how many are administratively assigned, though we can get back to you on that.
Yeah, because there's some great school options across the city. So why kids are going from Dorchester to Charlestown is something that I'm certainly curious about. And,
I could speak to that briefly. We've been working quite diligently for the last year and a half with MassDOT and BTD on the impacts that we will soon see with the North Washington Street Bridge construction, the City Square reconstruction, the lane drop on the viaducts, the Sullivan Square, which is really a circle, will become an intersection, and Rutherford Avenue. And what we found is there are about 450 students that live in Charlestown that attend school elsewhere, 64 different schools those 450 students attend. And we've been working, our focus for students that come into Charlestown, and there are more, there's 570-odd students that live elsewhere that travel to Charlestown each day. And we've been focused on the Harvard-Kent because that's the third trip of the day, and anything that has gone wrong or any delays in the first two trips affect that. And we have found that students attending the Harvard-Kent live in 22 different zip codes in the city. So oftentimes these things are very complex, and we have 22 zip codes is a lot. We have more, but most of them are P.O. boxes.
wow. Peter, I'm glad that you were here today. Thank you for that. Thank you. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you again. And I just wanted to go, I guess, continuing on with some of my questions, both specific but also policy-wise. I don't know that you have this today, but I'm, along with getting information about the BLA bus that East Boston had and what happened to that, I'm wondering also how much is the cost annually for the bus services to bus kids from East Boston to Charlestown to the Edwards Middle School? I know you don't have that, but I'm wondering if I can add that to the list of information to get from you.
What I would tell you, though, is if we would need to add a bus for that, meaning a bus that we don't currently need to operate.
No, not asking what your costs are right now to bus kids from East Boston to the Edwards Middle School. That's all.
Okay.
That's all, what that cost is. And then also, just making sure I'm clear about when you're talking about shuttle services on slide number 6, I think it is, page number 6. Yes. So the shuttle service you mean is directly from the T or from public transportation to the high schools? Is that what you mean by the shuttle services, that distance?
Yes, so it's directly from T Station and different hubs in the city to schools,
Okay.
high schools and middle schools.
So and the Excel High School, is that the one in East Boston, or is there another one?
Excel High School is the former
Southwest.
South Boston High School building.
Okay, so because I'm thinking of Excel. and the
Excel, that's a
former
charter
building.
school in East
Okay.
Boston, yes.
There is the Excel.
Don't worry about it.
It'll come, as you talk.
School there on Bremen Street, which is a charter high school, and we had to make arrangements there because unbeknownst to us, there were a number of students that come from Chelsea there, so they did adjust that route.
I was going to ask, actually, majority of the students who go to that high school are from Chelsea, so I want to make sure we were clear that the resources that we have are dedicated to BPS students. In terms of, where are we going? Oh, yes. So in terms of kids, specifically those who are, I've had a student, and we've tried to work on this, but we're back dealing with a student who's missed meals due to travel delays, specifically the breakfast program. So he's missed that. We resolved it, and then it's back to him missing it again. I think it has to do with a bus monitor being late or something or other. But do you track any data at present that would indicate whether and how transportation impacts access to school breakfast across the city?
We don't track information that way with regard to the breakfast program for a couple different reasons. First, it's the breakfast program itself operates in different models across the school district. In some schools, it's only before the bell. In some schools, it's largely after the bell. In some schools, it's breakfast at the classroom after the bell. In some schools, it's a different model after the bell. So the bottom line is there's no uniform breakfast model across all of our schools. In addition to that, while we track the time through GPS when our buses arrive at school, it would be unclear to extrapolate from that exactly what the impacts are on that with regard to students accessing breakfast or not. So for example, if a school starts at 8:30 and the bus shows up on time at 8:15, does that mean that the student is there to access breakfast? It's hard to say. We can try to dive into that and run a pilot to try to figure that out for next year, but it's not something that we would be able to track at present.
Yeah, I think it is an equity issue, and I do think that access to breakfast, right? So if a bus is late, so there's a uniformity that the bus should be on time, right? And the assumption is the breakfast is at the beginning of school. So with those two presumptions, if a person is late to school, which is, this student was consistently 45 minutes late to school, he was missing breakfast. So tracking that or finding the impact of late buses on access to breakfast, I think is, if you're going to talk about equity and putting so much money in the school budget for lunches, which I think is great, the fresh food that we have now, that's wonderful, build out. Piloted in East Boston, it works, it does change lives. We have breakfast in the classroom. I think it's an equity issue. So if the transportation is preventing access to that, I think you should be aware of it and should be studying it.
And Counselor, sorry to interrupt, but I think it would be great if we followed up with you offline after the hearing if there's time to get the specifics on that particular student so that we can look into it. The team is very, very adept at handling these one-off cases across the school district and trying to address them as quickly as possible. That's what they spend most of their days doing.
And I would hope, especially now that we do have, in many cases, breakfast in the classroom, not requiring students to go to a particular, cafeteria, whatever, that I would hope that in general the food would remain available to our students even if they did not get there at exactly the time we would hope. So hopefully we can address any individual
So there's the one-off
situations.
addressing, but then there's the studying and seeing what's happening, right? So you can then look at it systemically,
no, I
that
understand.
if someone is late, there's a policy
Yeah.
to still reserve the food or keep it available
Yes.
for the kid to eat. I don't know that that policy is implemented systemically if we haven't studied the issue or problem.
Yeah.
So with regards to kids, if they are late due to the bus, is there a discipline? I've heard of some discipline for the kids saying you're late and the kid saying it's the bus. So is there a system or policy that basically says if it's due to the bus, the kid does not get a late?
It's an excused tardiness.
It's an excused tardiness, so it
Yes.
doesn't
So my own
impact them,
children
there's no-
ride the bus every day, and if the bus is late picking up my own children, then they'll have an excused tardiness for that term, so to speak,
Because of the bus?
because of the bus. Right?
Okay. And so I've heard a lot, and I'm glad you listed literally, I think maybe half of the projects for the transportation and issues in Charlestown. We could speak and talk a great deal more about all the development and the building out in East Boston as well. I mean, there's a massive amount of change that's going on, and I'm wondering why or if there will be a policy from BPS to get some of that mitigation money when dealing with the BPDA or dealing with other people to get some of that money to help pay for the transportation. I mean, literally seeing you are causing transportation woes and gridlock through your project. So as a form of mitigation, even if it is temporary, yes, I'm going to bring it back to Charlestown, or East Boston, providing a temporary bus service or providing additional bus service for the time of that project, where they have taken away a lane, where they've made it actually harder for people to travel if I wanted to take my kid or not, or, we haven't provided, I can tell you on the Blue Line, we're packed at this point. And so is there a conversation, could there be conversation about getting developers to pony up some, I'm trying on the housing front, I'm happy to also add you to the transfer fee bucket, but is there some talk about this?
Peter, I'd ask you to weigh in if you're aware of any talk specifically about this. What I would add, which is different from what you're asking, but I think helpful context, is one of the areas that we do partner both between ourselves and Boston Transportation Department, but also with the MBTA, is on dedicated bus lanes across the city, which you'll start to see more and more of. Those are bus lanes for MBTA, but also for yellow school bus, to allow us to cut down on the travel time for our students. They have been successful, and I do believe that BTD is going to be rolling out more of them in conjunction with the MBTA in the years to come. I can't speak specifically to the bridge project, what transit authorities might be doing related to that.
Yeah, or just in general, mitigation. You're saying that these are all these projects and all this funding going through. So one of the mitigation we might potentially get is literally another bridge. Couldn't we have talked about getting another bus or something like that, additional, some sort of thing? I don't know if BPS is even at the table, and if not, why not?
We've been at the table on the Charlestown Bridge for 4 years, long before.
It's the North End Bridge to those folks in
Okay.
Charlestown. So
I
we
guess
just
it
go down
depends on
North
your-
Washington Bridge just to be neutral.
And one of the things that we floated early on, before it entered the design phase, is we pushed for a bus lane. So the new bridge will have a dedicated inbound bus lane for school buses and the MBTA. And sharing a bus lane with a transit service is somewhat unique. So we're very pleased that developed the way it has. Once the bridge goes down to 2 lanes, there will be a bus lane from Causeway to Haymarket.
Right.
So they can't help us on the bridge, but they can help us immediately thereafter. That, again, will be inbound. So we think that those do save time. And what we've also seen in Roslindale is regular traffic in both directions moves much better when the buses are in their own lane.
So when it comes to, and I want to make clear, I'm understanding what the pushback is for us getting the additional bus services from Charlestown or East Boston to this exam school or one. Is it a matter of it costs too much, or is it a matter of BPS just doesn't want to do it? This is a policy that you don't want to implement. And that helps me to really understand that in terms of my advocacy.
I see where you're leaning forward. I think Becky's the right person to answer this question.
Yes, so at the moment, what we are aiming to do is have consistent criteria applied to all yellow shuttle bus service, and not to provide any yellow shuttle bus service that's outside of that criteria.
So you don't want to?
So we do, currently, we do not want to.
Okay. That's different than me advocating or trying to fight for additional resources if the system or BPS is going to be in opposition of it anyway.
And
Yeah,
just
I guess just, well, John may want to clarify further, but what I would say is we could make a decision as a district to increase the level of service for all neighborhoods and
Yeah.
adjust the criteria, in which case the specific buses that you're concerned about may or may not fall into that expanded criteria, and then we would be looking at the same expanded criteria across every neighborhood.
What I would say, Counselor, if you don't mind to amplify this even further, is at the outset of this decision, it is not a cost issue. It is solely an equity issue. As we reported in our slides, there are roughly 3 times as many students in grades 9 to 12 going from Mattapan, Roxbury, Dorchester to Charlestown High as there are students coming from Charlestown, East Boston, and North End to BLA. It would be wrong of us to provide a bus for the students from Charlestown, East Boston, and the North End to BLA, and not to provide it to the students from Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and other neighborhoods going to Charlestown High. When you start to then place play that out, that is very, very much an equity concern that we would have, which then leads you down the path of, if you're going to do it and break the criteria for some, then you need to do it for all, in which case you're left with, as we mentioned in here, estimate, mind you, of $63+ million to provide that level of service for all high school students, more than 500 additional buses, more bus yards, more traffic, more greenhouse emissions. Again, I'm not trying to play the sort of dead-end role here. I'm just spelling out the consequences and the trade-offs that would be at play if we made that decision.
Right, and I think what I'm obviously trying to advocate for my district, and those parents who are particularly concerned about those kids who, by your own words, by BPS's own words, coming from Charlestown and East Boston to BLA, have an additional burden to get down there. So this is your studies on the travel time for the kids from East Boston and Charlestown to get to BLA because it's so uniquely located. So I am trying to make sure that we have squads every single possible way of getting those additional services. And so if I'm hitting the roadblock of this is just not equitable, and if we were able to get a benevolent donor to get us the $100,000 to get us the bus, I'm not sure that BPS would stand in the way of that, or would you?
To be quite honest, I think that we would stand in the way of that
Even
if
if
we
we
weren't able
raised
to
the
do
money
that
for a bus.
unless we were able to do it equitably for all students. I mean, this is just John Hanlon talking, parent of 4 children and BPS graduate of the district. This is not BPS talking. I want to urge that. This is me saying that I don't think that that would be the right decision to do that if we were not able to do that for other students in other circumstances.
It's always a complex issue, and certain school communities are able to raise more funds than others, and this is an issue that's been raised repeatedly in the last few years around which schools are able to raise from parents considerable funds that mean that those schools get more field trips, for example, than other BPS students. It's a tricky issue because, of course, on the one hand, we welcome our parents to engage and support our schools, and on the other hand, we do want to make sure that all of our students get the opportunities they deserve.
Yeah, no, it's a tricky, it's a frustrating issue, as you can imagine, and trying to advocate. I'm trying, even if you're not paying, if we're looking at the additional burdens that developers place on our roadways while they're trying to make money in our city, why we're not leveraging some of that to get, even if it is to add to the entire pie for every single one of us, why we aren't looking at that budget goal, if it is $63 million, why we aren't asking them to contribute to that at all. And
I think what I would offer there, Counselor, is it's certainly a fair question, and those of us who spend most of our lives working in transportation, maybe that's where our minds would go, but we also know that there are a lot of needs across the school district that we're trying to fill and a lot of decisions that we're trying to make day in and day out. And if there is a pot of money out there that we'd be able to get from philanthropy to direct it toward the children of Boston Public Schools, it may be that transportation is not actually the service that we would want to direct those funds to. It could be otherwise. It could be that we direct it to transportation, but I think that there would certainly be some heavy interest toward directing it in other areas as well.
so thank you so much. And again, we would get the history on the BLA bus from East Boston, and again, the current costs from busing kids from East Boston to Charlestown, East Boston, or the Edwards Middle School.
We will provide that information for you as well. And again, just as a further clarification, we have acknowledged that Boston Latin Academy is not as accessible via public transit as some of our other high schools. Some of them, the Community Academy of Science and Health in Dorchester is right across the street from Fields Corner Station. So some of them are very accessible. The O'Brien, Madison Park, very accessible. We know that some aren't. That's also why Boston Latin Academy has far more shuttle buses, yellow shuttle buses going to that school than any of our other high schools.
Thank you. Counselor Janey.
And thank you for your advocacy, Councilor Edwards. Boston Latin Academy is in my district, and it's very accessible. There's 4 buses that go right by. It stopped right in front of the bus, right in front of the school. So I think it's important to make the distinction whether you're talking about trains or buses, but there are lots of buses that literally stop right in front of the school, 4 of them. The number 14, the number 19, the number 23, and the number 28. All stop right there. I appreciate, too, the progress that's been made on the safe routes to school. I, too, did the walk. I did it at the Ellis, which is my alma mater. I went to the Ellis in second and third grade, which was wonderful. I did that last year, so that's great to hear that progress. In terms of, though, public transit and how our young people access buses, access schools, I would be interested in whether or not there's an analysis of how many schools, particularly the grades, the ones we're talking about, 7 through 12 here, are within a mile of a train or are within very close proximity to bus stops. Do we have that? To really determine, when we're talking about criteria for equity, who is close to public transit and who isn't in terms of our schools?
We can provide that for you. We don't have it at this moment. What I would suggest, though, is most, if not all, of our high schools are extremely accessible by bus. To your point, and in fact, where they're located, many of them are
Except
located.
for West Roxbury, which is like way out by itself.
Right.
Somewhere. It's kind of that outlier.
And even that is accessible by bus, but it's not, the frequency that bus travels out there is very minimal. So, to that degree, it's not as accessible. But we can certainly provide that for you.
How many by train?
I
The
just
only
wanna
one
be
I can
clear
really
that-
think of
sorry.
is the Kennedy Health Careers Academy being right there on the Green Line in Huntington, but I can't really think of any that are like right on the train station. Madison and O'Brien are close to Roxbury Crossing. Health Careers Academy is close to the Green Line.
Yeah, I was referring to what your very good point about bus service.
So bus and train, I'd be interested. But in trains, I don't know any that. So on trains, I don't know beyond those three that I've just named. I can't think of any that are very close to an actual train station, but I know several are close to bus stops.
Yeah, and off the top of my head, you've got English High is close to the Green Street station.
Oh, that's right. It is. It's right there at the
Madison
station.
Park and
Right.
O'Brien, as you said, are close to Roxbury Crossing. The Quincy Upper and obviously the Quincy Elementary, very close to the Chinatown Station.
Yeah.
And
Tufts.
the Community Academy of
Tufts
Science and
Medical.
Health and Boston Arts Academy are right outside of Fields Corner
Right.
T Station. So there are several, but to your point, not a large degree, not a large number.
And just to be clear, we didn't bring that specific data with us, but we're very familiar with that data in terms of determining the yellow bus shuttles. That's exactly the kind of information we study
of the
to make
criteria.
sure we're applying consistent criteria.
Now, in terms of the project stopwatch, I'd be interested in understanding where this is. I haven't seen it, for example, in Dudley, since the 7th and 8th graders were pushed off yellow school buses and into the T. And Dudley Station, like Forest Hills, has a lot of activity in terms of a lot of students who converge there. You've got a lot of the Timilty students get out at the same time. The City on the Hill students are right there in Dudley. So there are a lot of students that are coming through Dudley. I never see what color do they wear? Uniforms or T-shirts or?
It will come on by itself.
I'm not that patient. There've been a lot of bulletins come out, Project Stopwatch, where they have focused on Dudley. I think Dudley, Forest Hills, Andrews, they move around, but we've had quite a few special efforts there. It includes police, street workers that you may not recognize, but
Well,
the
what's the
kids know.
schedule then, so I can join them one day?
You can, why don't I send
That
you
would be
a
great.
stopwatch bulletin, and you have to sign up through the T, but every day we get a different bulletin as to where they'll be the next few days.
Yeah, I'm interested in the schedule, particularly as it relates to Dudley Station.
The schedule changes every week based on what they feel is going on with students at the T in different stations.
Okay, and you can get that information?
I'll get you that
Or, for example,
information,
like
yes.
the next time it's going to be in Dudley, I'd love to kind
Yes.
of join them.
Yes.
Because I haven't seen them. And what year did we put the 8th graders? That was that 2016, 2015? What was that?
2014, 15?
24, Jesus.
Yes,
It's
in
that
the
long ago.
afternoon at high
And then the
school time,
seventh
it's
graders
primarily street workers. There are a number of street workers. There's also some clergy that participate, some school officials, school police. So they're not all visible. But I will get you one of their flyers that come out 2 or 3 times a week so I can connect you.
Yeah, I think just to the conversation that we're having here in terms of equity and how our young people access schools, very important. The same way in which when we talk about, bus service for adults trying to access work and home and navigate appointments, So, I think this is a very important issue. What I was very disappointed about when the 7th, 8th graders were put onto the T, there was no real plan. There was nothing in place to accommodate the influx of hundreds or perhaps thousands of students who were going to enter into public transit at the same time where commuters were already on the train going to and from work. And we already know that our public transit isn't the most reliable system. And if more and more young people are going to be using the train to access, or the buses to access, MBTA buses to access, to get to and from school, then, I'd just like to see much more intentional forward thinking around how we do that in a way where our young people are safe and where they can, where all of our commuters can have an enjoyable ride on the T. And so that's my, I guess, parting words here. But again, I think very important to continue the focus on equity and making sure that that those who are in most need are getting the resources and supports that they need. And I think part of this conversation has to be making sure that we are doing much more around school improvement. I think there was a question earlier from our chair around administrative assignments and who's choosing what schools. And people often have to travel far for a school because they don't find the quality that they're looking for close to home. And so we need to do much more in terms of school improvement, particularly if we want children and our young people to, walk or bike or take public transit. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Janey. When schools, when students are assigned to schools, are we ever sending them a notice? I know when my boys recently received their assignment, they received a letter that noted where they could get a bus, and maybe it was one of the yellow shuttle buses. I'm not actually sure because one of my kids takes the T, 2 of them take the T, and 2 of them, they take my bus. But do we ever do recommendations when kids are assigned to school on the best way to get to school or the quickest route to school that could also include you take the green line to the red line to this yellow bus, the MBTA bus? It'll come on when you start. There we go.
The mailers that are sent out to families in the summertime of students who take MBTA buses give students information on where they can look on the MBTA website to build the safest routes and the most efficient routes to their schools.
But we don't actually make any of those recommendations.
No.
We don't.
I mean, I think that could be really labor intensive, but I wonder if there is a space to do that. Or if you said kids from this particular neighborhood or part of the city, because I'm thinking about Charlestown, I'm thinking about East Boston, where it might be a little bit easier to do that. So this is the quickest or best way to get to school.
It's certainly something that we can look into and potentially study. You're right to say that the process would be highly labor intensive because we're putting out 30,000+ transportation mailers every summer, and when you add more complexity to those mailers, there's more risk of errors. Quite frankly, we don't want to provide any misinformation either, but it's certainly something that we can look into.
Yeah, we have a bus. My 2 boys that are at Latin school, there is a MBTA bus that's I guess an S bus because it continues to Latin school. We only found out about it because a neighbor a few streets away said, "Oh no, this is when you want to get on this bus to get to school." We were never officially notified, and I wonder if the schools could also play a role in making sure that parents are talking to other parents about sort of the best route, because I'm sure a lot of this isn't. There are some tricks to the trade of parenting. There are tricks to the trade of getting kids to and from school quickly and efficiently.
So the schools are provided with a list of the S buses that will serve their schools, and our customer service representatives, if there's a question about the T, the S buses only appear on the PDF version of the schedule. And so we've been doing that. But I find, having been at Forest Hills over 800 mornings, kids are pretty adept at getting around on the T.
Yeah, it's
And-
amazing
and
when
we
my
let
kids have
anyone
figured
on-
out getting home from school. It's amazing to me they figured it out on their own. But I do think about like that idea when you're on an airplane for exit, don't forget to look behind you. And I guess, my kids have started to figure some of that out, but being a rookie at my kids taking the T to school, I don't know what I don't know, and we should figure out ways to share that information.
Most of our young people are so internet savvy that in 5 minutes, they go on Google Maps, they put in where they are now, they put in where their home address is, and there's the most efficient route, and it pumps out. It literally tells you, this route will take you 42 minutes, this one will take you 43 minutes, this one will take you 44 minutes, I'm going to take the 42-minute one. So I think many of our young people are very savvy with those kinds of
It's amazing what Google
information
Maps
sources.
can do for us as a city.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes,
you for that. I
exactly.
do, we have another round of questions, I'm sure, from Counselor Edwards. I just want to share public comment. We received some for the record, but I do want to read into the record from a student for the Boston Student Advisory Council, Franz Sicioni. I'm a junior at Boston Arts Academy and a member of the Boston Student Advisory Council. I personally am very happy that all students will be receiving M7s next year. I get to go to school taking 2 trains. My parents are divorced, so some days I take the green line to the red line, other days I take the orange line to the red line. My parents aren't able to drive me most days, and traffic in Boston often makes me late. That's why the M7 is necessary for me. My best friend lives in the same house and is a student at Boston Latin School. Last year, when Boston Arts Academy was in the Fenway, only a few blocks away from BLS, I was given an M7 and he was given an S card because his school was barely closer than mine. This was unfair and led him to be driven to school or walking early in the morning, very early in the morning. Now he won't have that problem. Students are being driven to school because they don't have M7s, which leads to a lot of traffic in Boston early in the morning and is one of the leading ways Boston is contributing to climate change. Once all of these students are able to take public transportation freely, it will greatly reduce Boston's carbon footprint. I'd like to thank Marty Walsh for making BPS students a priority, and I hope we will continue to be in the future. I also want to thank Councilor Cyber George for inviting BSAC to this hearing. I just want to read that into the record on behalf of the students. Councilor Edwards.
I just have a couple questions. One about the new innovative, I guess, pilot program or potential pilot program for scooters that we are planning on having in Boston, and looking at how you guys plan on dealing with, adapting for, in any way, shape, or form, having those as a potential transportation or not potential transportation for kids. Yes, they say you can't get them unless you're 18 years old. I don't know. We are still working on how we're going to monitor that in terms of how they can pick up and get those things, but they're coming. I would be on them if I was a kid. I would do everything I could to get on a motorized scooter. So tell me about have you been talking to BDD? Have you looked at the pilot? What's going on?
I want to be really candid here. We did discuss this as a team internally back at the bowling building. We do not see this as a viable option for us for the near future and potentially the long-term future. State regulations, other regulations wouldn't allow us to do this kind of a thing. And quite frankly, our own sort of approach to safety, I think, wouldn't allow for that either.
And that's good to hear. So in terms of a system, you wouldn't adapt for or pull them in, but I'd still be on the scooter, right? Coming to school, I would still find access. I would still do this. Is there any way to, that you would be, I don't know, maybe a public education that you would be putting out to parents? Or would you deny me access to school if I came in on an electric scooter many times? I don't know. You may not have the answer now. I do think there's a table to be set about this. I don't know if the pilot's going to happen this summer or not, but in as much as we are going to be moving anyway differently in Boston, and BPS is, I'd be on the scooters, all I'm saying. I'm going to put myself out there. My mother would be going nuts, and I would be on that thing, and I can't imagine other kids won't be as well. I mean, seriously, quite frankly.
I'd send my kids to school on a scooter, the 2 at BLA, if they could be on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
just for the record.
I think one
She would
thing,
do it.
one thing you might be more likely to see, Counselor, is the Blue Bike program that's sort of growing across the city. I think that might have some potential hope there. It's not something that we would orchestrate because, because of our own safety policies and state regulations, but it could be something that students and families avail themselves of. There's actually a Blue Bike station right outside of English High School. It could be the kind of thing that students of their own volition would choose that method of travel to and from school, but not something that we would actually manage for them.
So you don't see this as being part of the safe routes to school analysis and looking at that, and no? No, I mean, part of that is like looking at, biking and other alternatives. I just want to make sure it's going to be coming here anyway, so.
It could be something that falls under safe routes to school. I think that's where I left it when you brought up the suggestion in our last transportation hearing. It could be something that lives under that, but not something that, again, that we would necessarily administer. Quite frankly, I wouldn't want the liability of that, of managing a bike program or a scooter program for our students. I think there's too much liability and too much risk there. But we are trying to encourage, physical activity and access to school from the Safe Routes program. If families, again, choose to do that on their own with their students, then we're not going to stand in the way of that necessarily.
And then, so just talking a little bit about a cost of maintaining the buses, their transportation facilities. So in terms of your bus lots, does BPS, you lease a majority, or do you own the lots that you have store your buses?
We lease them.
So do you have, does that, because that's subject to development pressures and changes in cost, I don't know, what do you have long-term leases? What do they look like when you're negotiating them, just in terms of maintaining costs?
Peter or Dell, if you can weigh in, I don't know the terms of each of the leases right now. We have 4 bus yards across the district. We lease each of them. Certainly an argument could be made that we'd be better off owning our own bus yards. That's easier said than done, of course. It should be something that could be on our radar, but just not something that we're presently able to do. Peter, I don't know if you can speak to the terms of the leases, or Dell, if you have that information.
Keep going, and it comes on.
We have been looking at the leases, and we do have long-term leases. We just extended one of our yards for 15 years, and in the process of doing that, we'll be putting solar panels and a number of other improvements as a cooperative effort with the landlord. We have 2 of those that we're working on, and we're working on additional. So yes, we're extending the leases out as far as possible. And yes, there are development pressures.
Right, they can certainly make more money, right, off of building condos or something like that than storing school buses. And so I'm curious then, how much of the impact of having just these 4 lots impacts the options that you have for transportation routes? One's in Charlestown, for example. I would, how is having, I guess, limited access to these bus lots, or limited bus lots in general, or where they're physically located, impact your transportation routes?
So we have been gradually downsizing the fleet in Charlestown. Go back 7 or 8 years ago, and we had as many as 180 buses. And now we have 85 in Charlestown and only 65 routes. So we have adjusted buses between yards to the extent that we have the capacity. And there's certainly no reason to increase the capacity. We will continue to downsize that facility.
Okay. That's all I've heard. That's it.
Thank you, Councilor Janey, thank you very much. We do have 4 people for public testimony. If you could queue up at either one of the microphones, I think you all sort of know the routine. We have Linda Freeman, Dennis Kirkpatrick, Tara Shea, and Lori Barrett. And if you could limit your comments to a few minutes, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak. I'm going to be clipping through it. Door-to-door service. Is it possible to arrange a code? This is on behalf of another parent who has had frustrations over the years to protect their student with disabilities because of domestic violence. Can you code it? I know you have to have the address and everything, but can you code it so that that information remains, safe, confidential from the other parent who is not the custodial parent? Next, Morrissey Boulevard, when it floods, every time after a downpour, and you anticipate that flooding, could you kindly, for those who have door-to-door, alert the parents at the time of flooding so that they can arrange to pick up their child from whichever school that their student is at. Due to traffic congestion and all, has to be taken into account. The other part is, because we do not always have bilingual bus monitors, is it possible to use what they do for autistic kids, the laminated pictures and things in translation, like in English, Spanish, use the pictures for sit down, raise your hand, are you hurt, things like that. That's just an example. Because getting a bilingual monitor may be a bit more costly, and doing a laminated form of all the different languages might be a lot easier. And also transferable when it comes to field trips. Accommodating corner or corner to corner can only be done if the corner is not blocked by huge plowed-in snowbanks. Most of the time, everybody thinks of, sunny day, dry day, and they forget about our winters. When we have a lot of students that are walking and our residents are complaining because of the volume of students there, part of it is littering. They litter, they loiter, and they're a bit overzealous. We also have a slow streets program going throughout the city here and there. Parents of BPS students and students with disabilities and those who are ELL students should be strongly encouraged to attend these meetings, because if there's any type of change in traffic pattern, like a corner bump out, and they don't know about it, it changes the way school buses go through neighborhoods, especially smaller side streets, and direction, if it changes direction. Also, at that included is also the plowing. Most of the time, 99% of the time when plowing occurs, they dump it on the corner where the ADA corners are. Students with disabilities may not do well in cafeterias when breakfast is occurring. A lot of it has to do with the cafeteria size, because it's not the same in each school. It's going to be one way in an elementary, one way in a middle school, one way in a high school. And if you put high schools into middle schools, the size of the cafeteria is not conducive to our high school students' physical build. The other thing is neighborhood challenges has impact on students walking and traveling to access transit system to and from school, and these siblings may also be walking or waiting for the bus with their younger siblings, which impacts them getting to school on time because of their parents' work shift. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Dennis.
Thank you, Counselor, for the opportunity to speak. I come before the committee today to speak on behalf of the Roslindale Community School Council, which is in residence at the BCYF Community Center. Approximately 12 years ago, at the encouragement, if not the insistence, of the City of Boston, we evolved into a full child care business, and we employ a number of staff privately. For the first 10 years of our operation, we have always maintained a waiting list to get into our program. Because we live rent-free in a city building, we can keep our costs down to that which equals what the state would pay us for those families who get a state subsidy voucher for child care. For the last 2 years, we have been under-enrolled, and while some of that can be attributed to the change in the City of Boston school schedule, what we are finding out from the feedback from our parents is that a majority of them cannot get the bus to come to our after-school child care center. There are a variety of reasons for this. Among those are parents who might have been with us for several years, and they get a change in school assignment only to find out they can no longer get to us. There are people who are new transplants to the City of Boston who get assigned to a school that cannot get to us. We serve a very vulnerable population, along with families that are DCF clients and Department of Transitional administration clients. Most of our families are low-income families, which is why they do get a state voucher for childcare. I would say 95% of our clients are on these vouchers. One of the big problems, aside from no bus goes to your childcare center, is the delay when a bus can get there. These people are under strict state regulation. Some of it is handed down from the federal government, and it has gotten even stricter since the beginning of this month with respect to being assigned to a state licensed service and getting the actual attendance running. So what happens is that if the child cannot get to this center and be shown as present, those absences count against them. Some of our families are leaving work to transport their children from the school to the child care center, which also counts against their employment, which is something that is calculated by the state EEC, Early Education and Care System. They have to work a certain number of hours. Last year, we lost approximately 6 families because of transportation problems. And again, many of these were during the school year and because the bus didn't go there, or in many cases, they just were not eligible or it took too long to get the actual bus assigned. This year, the last count I had was 12 families, which was 15 children. Childcare companies like ours, and we are a childcare company, we're not as big as some of the big commercial entities that are out there. We're a community-based volunteer group that contributes our time and hires the necessary professional staff to do the actual work. We're in a position where we don't really have standing with the transportation department. Certainly if a child is missing, didn't get on the bus, we can call up and find out where they are. There's no way for us to advocate for these families. Many of our families are dealing with cultural differences when they come here. They're afraid of government entities, whether it is the state EEC system, the City of Boston schools. Many of them can't get a call back at a reasonable time because of their work schedule. We've had parents that simply gave up and moved out of Boston. And so we need some kind of a mechanism. I hold no hope whatsoever for this school year. It's already too late. We need a mechanism in place where these at-risk families can get some kind of accommodation to get their children to a child care center. We serve, again, low-income families, two-parent low-income families, immigrant families, same-gender families. These are all of the families that we're trying to serve here in the city of Boston, and in an increasing number, these families are not getting the necessary transportation to a licensed child care center. Some families are using the City of Boston schools extended program as a quasi-child care service, and that doesn't work for all of these families. Those that are under the state EEC system must use a state EEC licensed service. And it's gotten to the point now when we have a family walk in our door and is very eager to be with us because either they live near our building or they work near our building and they want their children near to them. We just tell them now, don't sign up for us until you can get your transportation settled. Unfortunately, some of these people cannot get the transportation. And it's very frustrating for us. One of the constraints that we are under, and this is all state licensed child care centers, is that we must maintain a staff person at the door to receive school buses. I can't have a teenager do it. I can't have the building custodian. I can't have a bookkeeper do it. They must have certification from the state. To the transportation department's credit, those children that do come to us, a total of about 10 buses right now from various parts of the city, requires me to employ a staff person with full teacher qualifications sitting at the door with a checklist to get all of those kids in the building. And they can arrive anytime from about 3:30 in the afternoon till about 5:30 in the afternoon. And that is one of the things that hurts me financially. I must maintain a student-teacher ratio for a certain number of children, and unfortunately, one of those people has to wait for the bus. They cannot solve that problem, and new regulations that are coming down are making things even stricter for these families. There are going to be less excuses for absences. There's going to be more, financial constraints on them, and a lot of these regulations are coming down from the federal government. As with any federal money, there are strings attached. As of March 1st, there's a very large metal cable attached. So I'm hoping by testifying here today, if I can't get some kind of accommodation for the remainder of this school year, certainly we need to have a mechanism in place for these at-risk families that need to have transportation to a licensed child care center. I would advise the council that I attended a meeting at the Boston Centers for Youth and Families last year, several months ago, and this was a meeting with the regional director from the Department of Early Education and Care. That state person and that state agency recently conducted a survey of all of the Boston public schools and all of the city's community centers that are currently offering after-school childcare. In many instances, this is being offered by city employees and on city time. In many instances, the state has ruled they must be licensed by the state. If a child can go into the building and leave of their own accord, they don't need a license. But if the child is maintained in the building and has to go to their parent to pick them up, they're going to have to get a state license. And the city cannot be the licensee. It has to be a private concern. In our particular case, we are the site council, which is partnered with the Boston Centers for Youth and Families, and we evolved to become a child care business. We offer preschool in the morning. Our after school takes K1 to grade 5, approximately age 4 to 12. So we're not talking about high school children who can get to us in the afternoon by MBTA bus. These are children that need the yellow school bus to get them from their school to our building. And sadly, if the bus is full, you don't get to go there. If the bus doesn't go to that neighborhood, you don't get to go there. If for any reason you don't, let's say you live near the school, but you work over here, and you would like the bus to bring the children to a daycare center near where you work and where you can take them home in your own automobile or on public transit, that is just not happening. And the damage that's being done is it puts businesses like us at risk of going out of business and no longer being around for an at-risk population in the city, but also it's causing these families to lose their state subsidy. Unfortunately, these two governmental entities at the city level and at the state level do not mesh. Each has their rules. Maybe we need a conference committee of some kind. And I will say the rules are getting stricter. It's getting harder for us to deal with this. I hate to turn people away that need us, but that's what's happening right now.
I want to thank you, and maybe we can talk additionally offline about some of the state
Thank you. I
and city
did give
conflicts.
testimony to one of your staff people
Great,
a while back
perfect.
on that. And Mr. Consalvo, Chief of Staff of the School Department, did meet with me privately in the hall and suggested we arrange a meeting on this to see
Excellent.
what can be arranged. Clearly, it's a problem. If it's affecting me, it's affecting similar programs throughout the city of Austin.
Don't disagree. Thank you very much, Dennis.
Thank you.
And then we next have Tara and Laurie. Tara?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tara Shea. I'm a 20-year resident of the North End. I have a daughter in 7th grade at BLA. I've already submitted written testimony, so I won't read that in detail right now, but I did just want to, I am one of those parents advocating for yellow buses for all high school students in Boston. I do have some concerns. Even just yesterday, I was at BLA at 7:45 a.m. School starts there at 7:20, and I watched child after child come in late to school. So I approached the man there sitting at the desk, and he works for the student support team. And I said, and he had a stack of tardy slips, about this thick, sitting next to him. And I asked him about how many kids, I said, I'm going to be speaking tomorrow about transportation, about how many, what are the issues for these kids coming late? And he said, you know, the T was packed, missed the bus was late. And I said, about how many kids, he's like, about 80 kids have been late here this morning, and about, he said, his estimate, about 40 of them were because of transportation issues. And he said these kids don't want to get in trouble. They get these tardy slips. Of course, some are excused tardy slips, but they're still late for their class. They still get, you know, scolded by their teacher, some understanding, some aren't. He said these kids are dejected, you know, coming in here late for school, which I think has ripple effects just for their self-esteem. It's, you know, this is middle school, high school kids, and they're learning and just how they start their day. I applaud your efforts to do a focus group about the MBTA and what that's going to, and how that is going to affect the MBTA for kids and for the crowding and so forth, but I actually don't think you need to wait till the fall. I think you can do that now. I think because in the fall you're going to be getting lots of calls from people with problems with transportation, so I would suggest going out there now because the T's are packed and kids getting on them, they're missing the train, they can't get that first train, they hustle to get to the train station, they miss the first train, it's too packed, they get on the next one, and then they're late, they're 10, 15 minutes late for school. I really like this guy Peter and the way he was thinking. I applaud that he even had that data. The 450 kids from Charlestown are going to 64 different schools, and I can guarantee when there's parents sitting in those cars watching those buses go by in that bus lane, you're going to be getting calls from those parents all the time about why can't we get a yellow bus, at least even temporarily while all this construction is going on, to get these kids to school. Because these kids want to get to school, they don't want to get in trouble. They want to learn. And we have a city that is booming with economy and money, and we're not providing all of our kids yellow bus transportation to school. In my mind, it's shameful. And I can't understand in this city with so much wealth that we cannot provide transportation for our kids to school. I think that's it for now.
Tara, one of the other challenges I would add that's for BLA is a 7:20 start. It's very early
It is
for our kids.
It is. Yeah, but any time for kids, it doesn't matter. The traffic's so bad in Boston right now. So then think about the parents that are driving their kids to school, then they have to get back to their workplace. It's incredibly burdensome. And if we had more yellow buses on the streets and getting these kids to school, getting them to school on time, and again, I also would say there's 18, my understanding is 18 people on staff in the Department of Transportation. I would suggest, in addition to these focus groups you're thinking about doing, go assign each of your people a high school or a middle school. There's 29 middle school, high schools, and have them spend a week at that school doing different things, going to bus stops, riding the bus with the kids, going there both at the start of school, at the end of school, to get some practical implications of all these, numbers that you're putting out, and all these, everyone's going to ride the T, and everything's going to be great, because, there are things you can learn just by actually getting out from behind your desk and going to these schools and seeing what's going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tara. Laurie.
Yes. Good
Welcome.
afternoon.
Thank you for
council
being here.
people. Laurie Barrett, I reside in Charlestown, and I'm here to advocate for the children that are in Lydia's area. She keeps admitting the North End, Beacon Hill, and the West End are also in your area. We have one bus that goes to BLA school. In September, some of the children were escorted off the bus. They could not ride the bus. So now we have parents, grandparents, myself, riding children to school. These children should be able to ride the bus. I counted children to get off that bus the other day, Wednesday. 35 children get off the bus from Charlestown to BLA. That bus has a capacity of 72 or 73 people. These children should be able to ride the bus. Like I said, 5 communities in one bus. The 7th and 8th graders, we all understand when these children took the exam that they were allowed to take the bus in the 7th and 8th grade. Throughout the city, Boston Latin Academy, I've watched them. They all take the bus from other communities except from the furthest away. East Boston, North End, West End, Beacon Hill, and Charlestown have one bus. You do need to put another bus on for these other children. There's going to be more children passing that exam school, and how are they going to get there? All right, these kids want to learn. They don't have to ride the T at 5:30 in the morning, be exposed to degenerates. You know, they've seen it all, these kids going to school. Okay, my granddaughter witnessed a shooting going to school. Okay, we don't want that for our children. Okay, they want to get on the bus and learn. They don't want to be kicked off the buses. We want to fill a bus is what we want to do. We want to fill the bus, and we're unable to. You have one bus going there, and you have 30 cars. You know, help us out. Listen to us. Listen.
Thank you, Lori.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for your presentation today. Councilor Edwards, do you have closing remarks?
Yeah, I appreciate your time. I understand the pressures that you're under and the immense amount of things you're trying to do, so I hope you don't sense in any way, shape, or form that I undervalue the amount of work that it must be to try and move tens of thousands of children every single day. But I do and will be advocating for my district and understanding how there might be a better way. And I agree with you, if we get more, then all of us should get more. I hope that's more of the conversation going forward. I do want us to, if there is a way to provide more busing, more resources for students, and to leverage that with developers, I do think BPS has a role to do that, to say that they should be paying more to helping, in as much as they're making so much money here, and as Tara alluded, that there's so much, such a booming economy, more of it needs to come to our schools. Yes, I will understand that you guys may still, when that booty of money comes in, may allocate it to something else for equity purposes, but I do think it's worth that analysis and that conversation. I do appreciate also in advance getting that information about, again, the BLA bus from East Boston, and again, the cost currently for transportation from East Boston to Charlestown.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.